Okay, everybody hear me, and whoever it's being recorded for can hear me? Good. Okay, well, welcome, everybody. We're so happy to see you. Those of you who are here and have joined us for the last 2 weeks, or even if you haven't been able to, I hope you will know that this is the third and concluding session of our series on answering our country's call, Jews in the military. Tonight we have a very different perspective on the Civil War and World War II and sort of what it cost our country to be involved in sometimes interfamily, intergroup, interregional conflict. Tonight we're taking a very different perspective. I hope we're taking a deeper dive into, as an individual, what does it cost you? We are Road of Shalom, so we are pursuers of peace. And tonight we'll explore some of the spiritual, ethical, and moral issues related to that pursuit from the perspective of those who are being asked to serve our country. And I hope we'll have time to also explore our Jewish traditions and texts about when it's justified and when, in fact, it's even necessary to go to war to achieve peace. We have two outstanding presenters to help us on this journey. And I'll start with this one, the man in uniform, who I'm just so pleased to see you come in this way. Chaplain Major Stephen Rein, Rabbi Rein, United States Air Force, and Larry Chalmer, our own Larry Chalmer, United States Air Force. Who better to talk to this issue? Chaplain Major Rabbi Stephen Rein was commissioned in the United States Air Force Reserve in 2005 and served as a chaplain candidate while awaiting ordination at several Air Force installations. He was ordained in 2009 at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York and served in his civilian rabbinate from 2009 to 2014 as assistant rabbi at Park Avenue Synagogue. Those of you who are members of Rodef know that we have benefited from the expertise and talent at Park Avenue Synagogue because we have Sidney Michaeli, who is our cantor, our assistant cantor, has also come from Park Avenue. Rabbi Rein has been the rabbi at Agudas Hakim, our neighbor down the road in Alexandria, since 2014. As an Air Force chaplain, Rabbi Rein served at Joint Base Langley Eustis in Virginia from 2009 to 2014. From July 2014 to May 2017, Rabbi Rein was chaplain at Joint Base Andrews in Maryland. Since his June 2017 promotion to Major, he has been assigned as chaplain at Arlington National Cemetery, where he has conducted numerous burials, including for Senator Frank Lautenberg and for Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick. During his Air Force career, Rabbi Rein has received numerous awards and decorations. And for this guy to my right, our own Larry Chalmer. Larry is a member of TRS, very proud, and a retired Air Force officer with combat flying experience in both B-52 and FB-111 aircraft. During his Air Force career, Larry served in Germany at U.S. European Command and in the Netherlands for the NATO as Joint Force Commander. Larry is a professor emeritus of the United States National Defense University in Washington, where he directed its NATO orientation program to prepare military officers and senior civilians for NATO assignments. Larry has been a fellow of the Senior Managers in Government program at Harvard University and a fellow in Foreign Politics, International Relations, and the National Interest Program of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And now I very proudly turn the floor over to our two military representatives, Rabbi Rein and Larry Chalmer, and we are fascinated already to hear what you have to say.
Well, thank you, Ellen. And I don't speak for both of us. I know what we're thinking, so I'm just delighted that we have this chance to speak with each other. As you can tell from my white hair, anything I'd say about the Air Force experience I had was the Air Force of then. The Air Force of now is present in the gentleman you see on my left. And the Air Force of next, as he was describing to me earlier today, well, we can talk about that as you might wish. I imagine that you might have a number of thoughts about Jewish life in the military that you may not find on our agenda today or in our remarks. So allow me to lead off with perhaps a couple of those, or what they might be. The number of Jews in this room are more than the number of Jews I worked with or met on any average month during my entire Air Force career. And I mean that precisely. Frequently, my family and I were the only Jews in our Air Force environment. Larger populations in various locations would increase the chance of encountering other Jews. In smaller populations, the reverse. At times, as you might expect, we encountered physicians or medical staff or dental staff or legal staff that were Jewish members. My Air Force life was rather sparse for Jews until we moved here into the Washington area, even while we lived in Germany and the Netherlands. We would travel to be with other Jews on the high holidays, for example, but rarely were there enough at any given one small location. In over 20 years of Air Force service, I never flew with other Jewish aircrew on training missions or in combat, and I knew only one other Jewish navigator. I hope that has changed since I've retired, and we have a new military service, the U.S. Space Force, which I hope attracts more Jewish men and women looking to truly expand those horizons. In meeting the rabbi on my left, I shook the hand of only the fourth Jewish chaplain, and I'll explain why I'd never say that except here. The hand of the fourth chaplain I'd encountered in 50 years, who is Jewish. 2 contract civilians, 1 Army officer, and this major. Yes, there are Jewish generals. 1 led the Air Force. 1 led the United States Marine Corps. The chief chaplain of the Air Force, is a major general. He's this gentleman's senior, yet his faith is Baptist. I cannot tell you the number of Jews in the combined U.S. military forces today, or their ranks, officer or enlisted. I'd estimate it at really only a fraction of 1% of the military. So our speaker this evening is a rabbi and an Air Force major and chaplain. Chaplains serve everyone, regardless of their faith or lack of it. I'd not introduce you to this gentleman as a Jewish chaplain any more than I'd introduce any of you as a Jewish lawyer, a Jewish astrophysicist, or a Jewish chief of oncology, mother, father, or sibling. Let's start with a bit of history. Would you, Stephen, give us a sense of your path to the rabbinate and then to becoming a chaplain?
Sure. So both growing up and when I entered college, I was pre-med because I wanted to please my parents, and my son the doctor. And true story, when I was being ordained as a rabbi, my parents said, or my mom said, "You see that tall guy up there? His sister's a doctor." My sister's a neurologist in Baltimore. At least one of us made our parents proud. But while I was in college, I was at NYU at New York University, and I'd grown up in a religious home. Went to Jewish summer camp and was active in my synagogue. So I had this sort of religious upbringing. But beyond that, I didn't think of it as a profession or career. When I arrived on campus my freshman year, there was no sort of organized conservative Jewish community on campus, and capital C conservative, not small c conservative. And so my roommate and I, we were friends from USY, from youth group, so we sort of created what was then called Koach, which was the conservative movement's sort of collegiate arm on college campus. Fast forward to my sophomore year, it's when I met my then girlfriend, now spouse, wife, and she was at the joint program called LIS College, a joint program between the Jewish Theological Seminary and Columbia University, majoring in psychology at Columbia and Talmud Rabbinics at JTS, and we were not very cool, so we had many dates in the library. She was studying Talmud, I was studying physical chemistry, and I was far more interested in what she was learning than what I needed to learn and prepare. And that was sort of the beginning of this intellectual awakening, and when I kind of put together this religious background, leadership within Hillel, and sort of intellectual curiosity, I realized that despite the red lollipop that my pediatrician gave me when I was a little boy, that actually wasn't what I wanted to do with my life. It was something far greater, far different, and that was to pursue the rabbinate, and that's what led me to going to rabbinical school. Now, in terms of becoming a chaplain, well, growing up in, can anyone tell from my accent where I'm from? Close. Right, the promised land, according to Bruce Springsteen. So I grew up in New Jersey, and right, what did I know? Again, this nice Jewish boy from Jersey, what did I know from the military? Where in Jersey? Now we're going to start playing. I grew up in Fairfield, New Jersey, Essex County. Okay, yeah, all right. So really, after my first year of rabbinical school, I was thinking, what am I going to do with my summer? I'd been a camp counselor before, I'd been a youth group advisor before, and a really good buddy of mine had done a Navy chaplaincy program. I said, oh, that's interesting. A little bit out of my comfort zone, but my grandfather was in the Army Air Corps World War II as a meteorologist. I thought, I'll get a kick out of this. And I said, what the heck? It was, there was no strings attached. If you decided that it wasn't for you, you could resign your commission with absolutely no requirement in terms of time, finances, or otherwise. So that was 2005 that I was commissioned and went to basic training down at Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama. Hottest, most miserable summer of my life. I was in Alabama in June and July. But truly just fell in love with the people I met, the experiences I had, the opportunities I had to just interact with a very different type of not just Jewish community, but just people in general. Growing up in New Jersey and living pretty much my entire life in the New York, New Jersey area, I think that was like the first time I ever met a Protestant. I thought everyone growing up, I thought you were either Jewish or Catholic. And then I realized that there were actually other people in this world. So that led me to that path, and I've been at it ever since, and I've just loved every opportunity experience I've had, going from not just the places that Ellen mentioned, but also spending time at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs as well, which is just an absolute delight to be out there.
You've had some fantastic assignments, indeed. When I spoke of... Oh, please.
No, use your mic.
Forgive me. Right, as I was saying, thank you. Good point. When I said I was the Air Force of then, and Stephen is the Air Force of now, the challenge, of course, is keeping up with not only the organization, but with what is of most issue to the members that Rabbi Rein would be working with. So how do you keep current? How do you get your fingers on the pulse of what's going on among your airmen, officers, and enlisted today?
So I'd say my current assignment at Arlington National Cemetery, perhaps unique in that the pulse of the people that I'm dealing with is not beating anymore. Right, but the reality is, and this is one of the major roles that chaplains play is like taking the pulse on a unit, the esprit de corps, the morale and welfare of a unit, and that only happens by just literally going from person to person and talking with people, yes. And saying, what's keeping you up at night, because usually the commander of a unit, it's not that they don't care, but like that they don't care, right? They're like get the job done. and I'm not interested in your tsuris. They wouldn't use that word, but that's all right. So it's often the chaplain that's really trying to figure out what's bothering you, what's keeping you up at night, collecting all that data, then is able to go to the commander and say, hey, did you know that these issues are going on in your unit? And in most workplaces, if productivity goes down, you lose money. In the military, if productivity goes down, you lose lives. So it's vital to ensure that you're really keeping a pulse on your people.
Thank you. When you deal with the families at Arlington, certainly, and you're dealing with elders, you're dealing with children, you're dealing with spouses of whatever age, other family. How do you prepare for that? How do you get a sense of what best you can do to serve that family?
It's hard because I have a very limited window to meet with a family and to do a service. I don't know, has anyone been to a burial at Arlington National Cemetery? Okay, so just about everyone. Right, it's about the fastest funeral service you'll probably see. And often people will have a memorial service at a home synagogue or church or whatever. Sometimes it's not. And I would say when I encounter individuals that have a family clergy person that they've been processing this loss with, sometimes for weeks, months, sometimes over a year, I'm sort of stepping in to fulfill a function, which is this ritual burial that's taking place. But every so often, I encounter individuals, they don't have a congregation that they're connected with. So I all of a sudden become not just the individual that's officiating at a burial, but sort of providing the grief counseling that they never encountered with a family clergy member. And I've had individuals that continue to reach out to me after the burial to sort of continue to seek solace and comfort. And I've then had to sort of figure out, okay, where do you live? Who do I know? And who can I sort of connect you with so that you could actually have a face-to-face encounter with individuals. But it's hard to really get a story of who an individual was. But I'd say the best part of my job is listening to, hearing, and lifting up the sacred stories of each and every individual. I frequently, sort of, not officially, but I guess unofficially, lead sort of Jewish tours of Arlington National Cemetery. And I often tell students or groups whenever I'm leading them, you look at all these stones. There are about 400,000 people buried at Arlington National Cemetery. Each of those stones represents a sacred story. And take a moment, stop by a stone, look at a name. Now with technology, you could Google that name. You could find out a little bit more about who that person was. These are not just names. These are not just stones. These are stories. These are families. These are lives. Fathers, mothers, uncles, aunts, grandparents, children that really made a difference, not just in our country, but in the lives of their families and friends as well.
I had wondered, and you've answered. I'd wondered, and you've answered about those sacred stories. Thank you. You've said as a civilian, you serve a congregation in Alexandria. Working at Arlington National Cemetery has given me the opportunity to officiate funerals for congregants of my own. Bridging these two worlds as a citizen airman has been truly rewarding. You're really wearing three hats: Rabbi, Chaplain, community religious leader. Are there lessons from these that you would share with us?
So it's interesting, being a military chaplain and the rabbi of a congregation, and a congregation that's located about 4 miles from the Pentagon. I've had a number of Jewish military families who have joined our congregation and have said, you're the first rabbi that actually understands me or understands our family, because they've arrived here and Johnny is now 12 and a half and needs a bar mitzvah in 6 months, and every other place I looked, I said, oh well, sorry, you got to get piped into the system, and the system takes 3 years, and maybe when he's 16 he'll have a bar mitzvah. And I thought, no, I get it. You're in the military, you don't have a choice of when you move and where you go and what's going on. to be able to realize that you've got a limited moment of time that you have this family as part of your community, and how do you engage real quick, how to create a quick on-ramp. And I would say it also has given me the perspective of how to do a lot of interfaith dialogue and conversation. Because as you indicated, Larry, in the military, right, you can't just sort of surround yourself with just Jewish individuals. My day job working in a synagogue, it's like, once in a while I encounter someone who's not Jewish, like at the grocery store. But if I'm going to the grocery store that day, I could go days without encountering a non-Jewish individual. But in the military, it's the exact opposite, right? My colleagues, and some of my best colleagues are Catholic or Baptist or some other various colors of Protestant, Methodist, and Presbyterian. And it's really given me an appreciation for different ways of approaching the sacred, which then has also, I think, enabled me in my civilian work of creating interfaith dialogue with churches and communities in our area, of having the common ground of, okay, I know what it means to operate in a multi-faith, pluralistic, interfaith environment.
I sincerely hope that somewhere this evening or this month or next month, your peers are saying, and I have a Jewish friend who has helped me to, and then fill in the rest of the message. Thank you. That actually leads me to another question in this same vein. What's it like officiating at services where the service member is not Jewish? Do families come to you with a request for a piece of liturgy or whatever it might be?
So it's rare that I officiate at non-Jewish funerals, but every so often someone sort of requests a non-sectarian religious funeral, but they still want a sort of a military chaplain present that sort of represents the Air Force. In which case I'll talk to the family and say, all right, do you want me to read a psalm? If I could read a psalm. If you're the person who truly was not connected to any faith tradition, I could read a poem. Is there a poem was there a favorite poem that Uncle so-and-so loved? And really I just then try to figure out a way to elevate this moment to something more than just the mundane, right? We're not just placing a box in the ground, but we're sharing a sacred story. It's interesting, before I was in this position at Arlington and just working as a chaplain on a base, I would frequently be sought out by individuals that were not Jewish, because they knew that if they went to me as a Jewish chaplain, I wasn't going to tell them that Jesus was the answer to their problems. Interestingly, the Jewish chaplains and Catholic chaplains had that. They were known for that, because I guess Catholics also don't really do a whole lot of proselytizing. It's not sort of part of their DNA. So if a couple came before me and they were just having marriage issues, okay, let's talk about your marriage. It's not about did you go to church today? It's do you know how to communicate with one another? But in talking about ensuring the sanctity of the individual that's being buried is lifted up, no matter their faith tradition, it reminds me of something that I try to do with every funeral that I do, regardless of who's being buried, is prior to the service beginning, I go out and meet with the honor guard, who's preparing themselves for the pallbearers, the rifle team, band members, and I often try to make sure I share a little bit about the deceased with them, especially for the pallbearers. So they're not just carrying another 200-pound box or 150-pound, right? It's not just a box that they're carrying, but it's a person, it's a story. And without me doing that, they don't get that story, right? And it's a way of really humanizing those moments for those individuals. Yes, they have a job to do, it's an important job, but it's a sacred mission. Then it's not just working in a maintenance shop carrying heavy stuff. These are people.
I'm wondering when I should approach him for an appointment so I can come in and speak with him about the issues I'm dealing with. We'll save that one.
I'll send you a Calendly link.
Thank you. To whom does a chaplain turn for counseling and guidance, other than our spouses?
right, all the the pillow talk. So I think it's true for chaplains, it's true for rabbis, I think it's true for therapists. I mean, right, every chaplain needs a chaplain, every rabbi needs a rabbi, every therapist needs a therapist. Because one, I mean, you just need, everyone needs someone that they could process with. But sometimes I feel, when you're in a helping profession, whether it's right, clergy, chaplain, therapist, doctor, right. All you do all day is you're emptying the tank. You're emptying the tank in service of others, of help of others. And at some point, you need someone to help you fill that tank again. Or you're just running on fumes, you're running on empty. And that's why it's vital to surround ourselves with the trusted colleagues, individuals, mentors that can help fill that tank, that can sort of like something called caring for the caregiver. And certainly within the chaplain corps, we take that very seriously to ensure that we care for the caregiver, because right, if we're broken, then we can't care for anyone else. And if we can't care for anyone else, then right, a major component of our Air Force is broken, and that's sort of the spiritual engine of individuals' lives.
With that in mind, do you chaplains get together with any frequency? Do you, whether it be virtually or in person or at conference, is there a sense of community, not only among a particular faith, but across the chaplaincy, and then perhaps across the military?
So I don't know of a all-military chaplain gathering, but certainly within the Air Force Reserves, I mean, there's an Air Force Reserve Command Chaplains Conference that takes place usually each year, sometimes every other year. It's often right around Passover, and I'm unable to attend. You would think, they would look at a calendar and say, oh, gee. But then they tell me, it's not on Passover, it's like the day before. I'm like, no. But there's every year, all the Jewish chaplains that are endorsed by the Jewish Welfare Board, which is sort of the endorsing agency for most Jewish chaplains in the DoD and in the VA, comes together for an annual conference, and that includes our Army chaplains, Navy chaplains, Air Force chaplains, and VA chaplains. And little factoid: the JWB, the Jewish Welfare Board, actually gave birth to another very well-known institution. There's one locally on Little River Turnpike called the JCC. Right, the JCC got its start sort of giving matzah to World War I soldiers and sailors, and then sort of divulged into the JCC Association. So that's really a beautiful opportunity to meet colleagues, both within and among the sister services, and to learn from one another, to get some chizuk, some strength from one another, and to sort of take the shoes off for a little bit and relax.
Thank you. The First Amendment, of course, provides for the free exercise of religion. That constitutional amendment has been under some duress. There are 5 major faith groups recognized in the U.S. military. Major. There are others: Christianity, Muslim, Jewish, or Islam, Jewish, Judaism, Hindu, and Buddhist. What has been your experience when dealing with a primarily Christian group of military men and women? You've shared some of the angles at which you can approach them, and they come to you. But the real question, I suppose, is what's it like being a Jew in today's Air Force?
So I think my experience is probably not the best paradigm, because as a chaplain, I got away with a whole lot more than anyone else. Right? If I want to ensure that there's kosher food at some sort of event or program, right, the response is often, oh, of course, right, the Jewish chaplain eats kosher food, right? But I've heard frequently from airmen, soldiers, Marines, Coasties, that's not always the case for the average individual. That doesn't sort of wear their Jewish identity right on their uniform quite literally, or perhaps on their head. And sometimes commanders don't quite understand. Well, what do you mean you need this day off? What's this holiday that you're telling me that this is? Or I don't understand. You work on Saturdays. Why do you need this day off? And they don't get it, which is often why the role of a chaplain coming in to sort of explain to non-Jewish individuals what these various observances are all about. But it's hard because you've got holiday parties and observances for Christmas and tree lighting ceremonies and Easter egg things, and now with the tree lighting they have a little menorah, and it's like, oh, it's nice and cute, this little menorah that they have next to this massive tree, and part of me it's like just get like I don't need it, just do your Christmas thing, and part of me is like, oh no, it makes you feel good because now we're represented here too, and you kind of have these conflicting feelings inside. But for the most part, I've been met with nothing other than mostly sort of respect and curiosity. People are very curious. Many military members have not I shouldn't say they've never met a Jewish person, but have not had a lot of close contact. If you think about what are the areas of the country that have the largest sort of Jewish urban populations, those are often not the places where most military members are coming from. Right, most members of the military are not coming from New York, Boston, LA, Miami, right? Chicago, Philadelphia, right? They're coming from the hinterlands of Texas and the southeast and somewhere in the Midwest, places that aren't these large urban centers. So while they may have met onesies and twosies of Jewish individuals, they've not really had the opportunity to really have deep conversations with Jewish individuals. So I look at it as an opportunity, as sort of almost a kiddush Hashem, right? A sanctification of God by being able to share a little bit about who I am. And also always recognizing, especially as a chaplain, and as I said, especially because I wear my Jewish identity quite literally in my uniform, that I'm always representing the Jewish community. Chaplains would often say that we're sort of visual representatives of the holy. And in some ways, I also see myself as a visual representative of the Jewish community and Jewish people. And I take that very seriously.
By the way, if you haven't noticed, on the rabbis or on the major's uniform, you'll see a series of the Ten Commandments and a star. That is unique in the manner in which chaplains are recognized by their religion on their uniform. And I'm sure, I don't know, has it ever been a source of inquiry, or what's that all about?
So among my colleagues, especially Air Force and Army colleagues, the chaplain insignia is sort of where you see it here. I think in the Army it's on the left side. But it's on their chest. And if you can sort of see, it's the Ten Commandments with the Star David on top. The Air Force has an Aleph through Yud. I think the Army has a Roman numeral 1 through 10. But in the Navy, it's on their collar. So one collar has the rank insignia, the other collar has the chaplaincy insignia. And if you're just any other officer, you'd have a rank insignia on both collars. So I have a lot of Navy buddies who, because it's not a cross, but there's a star on it, they'll be walking around a Navy ship, and some young seaman or sailor sees from a distance a little star on the collar, and they think this admiral is walking by, and lo and behold, it's just it's an ensign or a lieutenant. But the vast majority of military members have never met a Jewish chaplain or any chaplain other than a Christian chaplain. So for many military members, a chaplain insignia is a cross, only because they haven't met anyone else. But if you're wondering how many Jewish chaplains are there, so Air Force wide, there are. I asked my supervisor today, who just came over from the Pentagon as a personnelist and sort of moving people around. So he said, as of today, there are 581 active duty chaplains in the Air Force. There are about 283 in the Air National Guard and probably about 500 and change in the Air Force Reserves. So you add that all up and about 1,300 chaplains total in the Air Force. Jewish Air Force chaplains, active duty, there are 6. Reserve component, 9. And there's 1 Air National Guard Jewish chaplain. So you add that up, you've got 16. So the odds of your average Air Force military member being stationed anywhere, right, where any of those 16, or certainly if you're active duty, right, the odds of you being stationed anywhere where any of those 6 people happen to be are slim to none. And of those 6, there are a handful of bases where they always keep one of them. And so if you're not in one of those places, you'll probably never see one.
Where are those?
They'll always ensure that there's a Jewish chaplain at Lackland Air Force Base, which is where the Air Force does basic training. They'll always ensure that there's an Air Force chaplain or Jewish chaplain at the Air Force Academy. They pretty much try to always keep a Jewish chaplain at Ramstein to have someone positioned in Germany. They try to keep a Jewish chaplain over at Kadena in Japan to sort of have Jewish chaplain coverage in like these sort of very large geographic areas. And you know, when you're a Jewish chaplain, especially in those types of spaces, when it comes to holidays, I mean, right? You know, Rosh Hashanah is not in here. I guess Rosh Hashanah is often is it one day at Rosh Shalom, right? So it's one day at Rosh Shalom. At a conservative Orthodox synagogue, it might be 2 days. And if you're a Jewish chaplain deployed somewhere, Rosh Hashanah, it could be a week, it could be 10 days, because you go from place to place, and it's Rosh Hashanah whenever you get there. That's how long your Rosh Hashanah lasts. Thankfully, they don't make a week-long Yom Kippur, because that'd be... but they call it the Holy Hilo, as you sort of helicopter from one place to the next. But you've got these handful of spaces where you'll potentially have a Jewish chaplain, and you've got Air Force members stationed all over the globe, and there may or may not be someone, often not, stationed or attached with you. I mean, as Larry mentioned, you said you went your entire Air Force career without having a Jewish chaplain stationed with you.
Yes. Unusual times then. There's a reverse side of what I had mentioned earlier. One evening, while I was serving in Europe, we had a crisis in progress. I was at the U.S. European Command in Stuttgart, Germany, or outside of Stuttgart. And we were gathered around the senior officer there. We were looking to come to agreement on what the next action might be. We thought we had nailed it fairly well as good staff. We brought it to the senior officer. They bought the idea, and his remark in accepting it was, "Well, good. This is excellent. I'm not surprised we're all in agreement here. We're all Christians, aren't we?" And one of the other staff officers knew I was Jewish. The silence was palpable for just a brief moment, and I said, "Actually, sir, no, we're not. I'm Jewish." And the silence became even deeper, of course, just then. And there was just a brief pause, and he immediately apologized, said that was an inappropriate thing for him to say. I said, "I understand completely," but I had to reply that, "No, I'm not one of the Christian gang here." And we went on from there. It never became anything other than that. It was just a gaffe. I took it that way.
If I could just...
Oh, please.
Because I just remembered, as you asked about the chaplain insignia, and I don't know if this was covered in the previous 2 sessions, but does anyone know who the first Jewish chaplain was in the U.S. military? Was that mentioned?
Yeah, I think so, but
I think it was in the Civil War.
Yes, so Rabbi Jacob Frankel was the first Jewish chaplain, and he was appointed in 1862 by President Lincoln. So prior to 1862, the definition of a chaplain was someone of the Christian faith. And actually, until much more recently, the chaplain insignias of each of the services were basically the Ten Commandments and a cross. And until we realized, actually, well, while we call ourselves a Judeo-Christian country often, right, but that's not really fair and nice, right, to the fact that, right, there are many in this country that are not either of those. So now I think the chaplain sort of insignia is sort of like two hands with like sort of just light emanating from them.
There'd be a lot more people wearing them if you would turn it into a piece of jewelry and sell it in the PX.
That's
Just saying,
That's
there's an
right.
audience.
That's right.
May I ask how many other chaplains of other than Christian and Jewish faiths there might be in the military? Muslim?
I think the Air Force has.
Could you repeat the question?
So the question was how many chaplains of other faith traditions? So I said there's 6 active duty Jewish chaplains. I think there's maybe 2 active duty Muslim chaplains. And we used to have a Buddhist chaplain. I don't think we have one at the moment. And everyone else is Christian. The majority are Protestant. There's actually a shortage of Catholic priests. Everywhere. Yes, and sort of the way they work, something that the diocese has to sort of send you to or allow you to work within the military. It's not uncommon that at a military installation you'll have a chaplain team made up of Protestant chaplains, then they'll have a civilian rabbi if it's needed, and a civilian contracted priest if it's needed, and sort of all these civilians coming in to make up for other services.
What about Quakers and conscientious?
Microphone.
Quakers and conscientious objectors, is that?
That was the question.
To my knowledge, there are no Quaker chaplains. I guess if one were a conscientious objector, it'd be an interesting profession to go into. Yeah, I mean, I'd say the vast majority of chaplains I meet are Baptist. Sort of where most are coming from, and if you ask me later, I'll give you some more ideas as to why I think that is. But I think we're being recorded.
Thank you.
Would you mind if we open it to questions for a few minutes?
Sure, and then I could also share whenever you want some stories of people that I've had.
By all
opportunity to
means.
meet, yeah.
We've got one over here. Just
Thank
raise
you.
your hand, and Ken will come to you with a microphone.
Have you or any of the other Jewish chaplains that you're aware of been approached by other servicemen regarding anti-Semitism that they've experienced while in the service?
So I would say there's less anti-Semitism and more ignorance that I've observed. So for example, a year before I came into the Air Force in 2004, there was a whole big blow up at the Air Force Academy about proselytizing. And I mean, to make a longer story much shorter, you had a lot of professors who are Air Force officers who are teaching these young cadets, and these professors would say, I'll see you on Sunday in church, right? And these cadets understand this as right an order, right, that they're being ordered to go to church, and right. So I'm not sure that it was anti-Semitism as much as ignorance, but also right an understanding of right when you're operating in a very hierarchical power structure, when you're in a position of power, right, what you may be saying as advice or an opinion sounds like an order and fact to someone below you. And so there was a lot of education that needed to happen. That's right when you're a colonel talking to a cadet, right, what you think is a good idea is not heard as a good idea. It's heard as, right, this is what I have to do, right? And so there was a lot of sensitivity training that needed to be done. In terms of I don't want to wade too much into the current conflict in the Middle East, but I can say that within sort of military colleagues of mine, I think there's far more sympathy with Israel and the IDF than I think sometimes outside of those spaces, just because the military is an organization that understands the challenge of war, of being in a military, of war being ugly. And I think in some ways, the general public, because of social media and its availability, is sort of for the first time seeing today how ugly war actually is. And I think military members have always known that war is really terrible, and people die frequently, and innocent people die frequently. Right.
Is this working? No, it's really working. So I don't have a question, but I was going to share some of my experiences. My experiences in between the two of you. I served active duty in the Navy for 20 years in the 90s and retired in 2011.
Bravo.
And my experience as a Jewish military member was actually very positive. And I would share a couple of things. The first part was very scary because I ended up on a ship in 1992 and the chaplain came to me and said, "You're the Jewish lay leader." And I'm like, "What is that?" I didn't know. Fortunately, I didn't have to do a lot. But like stationed in Guam, it was really cool because our community was so small, so we merged with the community. And on base, we have chapels, and it's all denominations. We share, and some of them will have a separate little area, others will not. But like in Guam, we all got together. We would have services sometimes, and that was like the first Passover I actually went to, and it was the whole island, and we all came together. It was at a hotel. It was very lovely. And we did a lot of training on tolerance, and you work with people from all backgrounds, all religions, and for the most part, everybody gets together. I have two other stories, but the negative thing is every year the Christmas party comes up, and every year I have to explain it's a holiday party and we have to be inclusive to all our Hindu friends, Muslim friends, and everybody who doesn't celebrate Christmas. And it was an innocent mistake. It was just ignorance, and I'm still doing that. I work at Walter Reed. We still do that. I think now we have a holiday party, but then when I was stationed at National Naval Medical Center, my son was born. I didn't belong to a synagogue. And Rabbi Shudnow, he helped me do a baby naming ceremony. They really reach out to you. And then when I was stationed in Japan, which was my last tour, it was the most positive experience. There was a small group. We had no rabbi. There was nobody up in Yokota at that point. I don't know why we didn't have a rabbi, but we had this civilian, and he was our lay leader. And every Friday we would have Shabbat services together, and afterwards we'd walk out into town for dinner, and that's where I learned like a lot of the Shabbat songs, and it was just such a positive experience. But I think we're very tolerant for the most part, and people are interested in learning about your religion. So, and the other thing is you don't have to take vacation for the high holidays in the military. I always got them off. Now I have to take vacation for all of them. So anyway, sorry to be so long, but I think there's a lot to be learned, and it really was a positive experience.
To maybe give a little bit more color to that sort of notion of tolerance and acceptance. Just picture this for a moment. You have a commander, let's say in Afghanistan, who's not Jewish, and knows that he has 6 Jewish service members on his base. And because of that, he makes a request, and the Department of Defense, the military, flies a rabbi to his base to ensure that they have a Passover Seder, or that they have a high holiday service. And you think about the resources that are being spent to ensure that those 6 individuals in the middle of Afghanistan can celebrate Passover, can celebrate Rosh Hashanah, whatever the holiday is. You think about any of our movements, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, how many of those movements would say, there's 6 Jews somewhere in the hinterlands, we're gonna pay and fly some rabbi to that for them to have a Seder or a high holiday service. No, if they can't pay for it, you don't get it, right? So, in terms of the length that individuals will go to ensure that service members have their needs met is certainly not to be diminished.
Thank you for bringing that up, by the way. Marvelous.
I can see you. I promise I can see you all. You'll go in the order in which I do see you. I will come to you. You're good.
Yes, sir.
One quickie about when you were in the South, were people looking for your horns? But the real question is, are you constantly getting questions from other chaplains, non-Jewish chaplains, about how to deal with a Jewish person that they're trying to help? Is this a regular thing?
Yeah, because most of my chaplain colleagues that I've met along the way, right, they are not Jewish, but they're still Jewish service members, and they're constantly asking me, like, how do I provide for such an individual? I mean, a very recent example was at Arlington. There was a Jewish individual who had scheduled the burial on Yontif. I think it was on Sukkot. And so they said to me, Rabbi, can you come to the funeral? I said, no, I can't. It's Yontif. I said, well, okay, the funeral's happening anyway. So then my Protestant colleagues said, all right, I'm going to do this funeral. Like, what do I need to know? I said, well, if you stick to Psalm 23, they'll probably be happy. I 2 weeks ago, the enlisted aide for the director of the Air National Guard, who's I believe is a 3-star, said to me, my boss is hosting the defense attaché from the IDF at his home, and he wants to know, like, do I need to kosher the entire kitchen? How do I make sure that they can eat? So first I was surprised they even knew what kosher in the kitchen was. But I had to explain, okay, this is what you need to do. Well, first of all, I actually asked them, they may not keep kosher to begin with, so before you go through a whole bunch of great lengths. But so yeah, I'm always being asked questions about how do we meet the needs of Jewish service members, and especially living in the NCR, in the National Capital Region, I'm sort of like the go-to Jewish chaplain for all sorts of things that people look to me for help and guidance.
The colloquial term would be the duty Jew.
Right.
Before I ask my question, I just wanted to say that at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, we didn't need to have a Jewish chaplain flown in because we had Rabbi James Apple, who was a Navy chaplain. But we did get frozen, prepackaged Passover dinners from Fort Bragg. So that was a big deal.
Sounds delicious.
So my question is, you mentioned the sort of, no, it wasn't. You mentioned the sort of ugliness of war, and by extension, I'll say the pain and the fear and the difficulty as well, and that chaplains understand. And I'm wondering if you can share with us, from our Jewish teachings, when are we taught that war is necessary, not just justified, but when is it necessary to achieve a longer range peace?
Look, I mean, the Torah defines what's known as a milchemet mitzvah, right? A commanded war, certainly when it's a war of self-defense, for sure. And what's a little bit more troubling, given our current reality, I mean, the Torah also says, right, the war to expand the borders of the land of Israel was also a commanded war, which is probably one that doesn't touch well on, I'd say, most more sort of liberal sensibilities today. And so, I think we are, fighting a just war is definitely also part of our Jewish tradition. And how do you fight a just war justly? And sometimes we debate. We may say, okay, yes, the war is just, but maybe that the way in which it's being fought is not just. While also recognizing that it's always easier to play the Monday morning quarterback, right? It's always easy to right after the strike happens, you can then analyze it and say, well, gee, should you not have? And you're always trying to figure out what was the information that you had at any moment in time, and you're making the best decision that you possibly can. I think a lot of what chaplains often do, I mean, not so much my current role at Arlington, but in general, certainly chaplains that are deployed, is you're dealing with a lot of moral injury, right? Which is when individuals, especially individuals in the military, are sort of suffering sort of this sense of damaged ethical sense of self, because you realize that you actually just killed someone. And maybe it was justified, but if that doesn't somehow affect you in some way, right, there's probably something wrong with you. I remember spending some time counseling a drone operator because, he said it's one thing if you're coming face to face with your enemy, and you happen to be stronger or more talented or mightier, and you win. It's something altogether different when you're sitting in a basement cubicle in Nevada somewhere, with a joystick. You push a button, and all of a sudden something blows up, and then you take your headset off, and you go to the candy machine, and you come back, and you do right. It wears on you in a very different way as you kind of realize, like, oh my goodness, like I just ended the life of another human being, and my physical life wasn't really threatened. I mean, yes, and maybe in some existential ways, sure, but that grates on you. And I mean, no different than the individuals who are, whether it's sending missiles, bombs, dropping bombs. I mean, the acknowledgement that, right, you have the power with the push of a button to cause a lot of damage and destruction, and that's which is why chaplains become so important, especially in deployed and combat environments, because people, they need someone to talk to sort of get this weight off their shoulders that they're carrying around.
Let me ask just a quick, since I'm still holding the mic, a quick follow-up question based on what you just said. So it's actually part of what you just said. What informs that joystick operator that this is not a video game? Because our kids are so used to this now, this violence with no consequences. What helps this person, man or woman, cross the line to understanding the consequences of what they've just done?
Hopefully they've been well trained. I mean, ethical training is a part of every different level of professional military education. And look, it's hard, because on the one hand, right, you don't want, right, this drone operator to think that they're just playing a video game. On the other hand, you also don't want this person to be thinking so much about what they're doing that they sort of become immobilized, right? So you're always trying to toe this balance between creating enough protocol so that you kind of know how to do your job and how to do it effectively and do it ethically, while also maintaining one's human dignity in the process as well. And that's a very delicate line that one walks. I've once heard that one of the reasons why so many of the infantry and fighters are sort of under the age of 25 is because they don't ask questions. They just sort of do whatever someone tells them to do. And then as you get older, you start sort of the prefrontal cortex is fully formed. Now you start sort of analyzing and questioning, and is this the right decision, wrong decision? And sometimes in the fog of war, I said, no, we don't have time for you to have a conversation about it. You need to go do. So you're constantly sort of two sides of that same coin, ensuring that you said you maintain the human dignity of each individual, but also, right, you're trying to win a war, or you're trying to defend your sovereign interests.
Is it my turn?
Yes.
It's my turn.
It's your turn.
So many things have been covered so far that a lot of the questions I had, I'll probably not ask. But let me just describe a conundrum that I was faced many years ago during the Vietnam War, which addresses the discussion you just had. I was in the Connecticut Air Guard from 1966 to 1969. And of course, the Vietnam War was going on there. And there was some concern among all of us that we were going to be called up for active duty and serve in Vietnam. I was very much opposed to the war at the time. And well, at the time I was opposed to the war. And so my question that I asked myself is, if we were called and I had to serve in Vietnam, would I do it? And I didn't think very long and hard about it. And I said to myself that as long as I'm being called up and I'm going to serve on active duty, as much as I opposed to the war and thought it both foolish, that I would serve. And I would try to serve as well as I could. So that was the conundrum that I dealt with at the time, which sort of addresses the questions that you had. My biggest concern, I should tell you, at the time, I mean, it's kind of laughable, but it's true is true. My biggest concern was my parents did not know that I was still flying aircraft in the Air National Guard. If I were called to serve in Vietnam, what do I tell them? I mean, this was my big worry at the time. But I didn't think very long and hard about going over. As it turns out, Johnson did not call up the Air Guard or reserve units, except for a few select units. I know the Iowa National Guard was called up and served, and another National Guard unit was. Why they picked them, I have no idea. But at any rate, I'll tell you a little story about Senator Lautenberg, since you officiated at his funeral. I was living in New Jersey at the time, and I was taking a job down here with the Mitre Corporation. I don't know if you're familiar with it. And I took the job before we were able to sell our house, and I used to commute on weekends with an airline called People's Express. I don't know if you remember that. Sunday, I always had my little bag, and the New York Sunday Times with me. People's Express was not a was a very informal airlines. There was no line. You were ready to board. You just boarded. I happened to boarded first. I took the first seat there, and I put down my New York Sunday Times. And then I went back a few seats to put my luggage in the luggage rack. And I came back, and I found my New York Sunday Times on the floor. And there was only maybe half a dozen passengers, but they were stepping over it. And who was sitting at the seat where I put the New York Times? Senator Lautenberg. And that really irritated me. So I'm going to make a request. I know where Senator Lautenberg's tombstone is, where his stone is.
So do I.
Yes, I know you do. Of course, we walk by it many times. I want to be buried next to him. And the time will... And at any rate, I'll just tell you one other experience. I was on it. Well, just one other, very quickly. I was on active duty for 4 years. I was stationed in Germany. I went to flight school in Texas, and I went to Oklahoma and California for further training. And not once, and I should tell you my experience is similar to yours. In flight school, there was only one other Jewish kid. He was from North Carolina. I don't know what happened to him. Other than that, I don't recall ever running into anyone who was Jewish. In Oklahoma, in Mather Air Force Base in California. In Germany, not once. And not once, as far as I know, unless it was behind my back, was I ever confronted by any kind of suggestion that might be described as anti-Semitic. I never thought much about it at the time, but in reflecting upon it, I just wanted to let you know that my experience is not too dissimilar from some of the others who have talked tonight about it.
Thank you.
I thought you were going to leave a New York Times on his tombstone. I thought you were going to leave a copy of the Times on his tombstone.
The cemetery staff, they'd clean that up real quick.
I have two questions. Can you clarify? I've been to funerals at Arlington, Jewish funerals. One was terrible. Does the family have the right to request a Jewish chaplain?
So if a family is Jewish, they absolutely can request a Jewish chaplain,
But they're not necessarily available.
Well, Arlington will either provide a Jewish military chaplain, or if, for example, right now, right, the Air Force is the only service that has a Jewish chaplain at Arlington. The Army and Navy have a contract with a rabbi who's a civilian, so they will provide a contract, a civilian rabbi.
Interesting.
But certainly a family could say, we have our own family rabbi, and they're more than welcome to bring a family rabbi also. However, right, that only works if you live in sort of the DMV, right? If you're coming from
Right, no, I
California.
know that. I'm just thinking about one of the couple of services that I've been to. One was terrible, and I couldn't believe that this one didn't get a Jewish chaplain. Can you clarify for me in terms of drones, because I'm really having a problem with the drones. How much control does the operator have? I'm thinking of the World Central Kitchen incident. How much control, and I don't know that you can really answer this one, how much control does the operator have if they realize that it was the World Central Kitchen rather than whatever they thought it was, to not drop whatever the drones drop?
I mean,
as I said, I don't know that you can answer
far
that
beyond
one.
my expertise, but for the most part, I mean, the drone operator is basically being given the order based on someone else who's doing the intelligence gathering and surveillance. It's unlikely that the drone operator would really be able to know what the target is, other than, right, those who are gathering intelligence are saying, right, that target at these coordinates, that's what you need to hit.
Let me offer that there is rarely a black or white answer to what you're seeking that would be available to the public.
I gather that, but drones to me are such disconnected, even more so than, the face-to-face, and it's beyond my comprehension, so.
I think all of us have at some point understood that we never get all of the information about whatever subject it is we're researching.
I think one, as beneficial as it is to have the ability to do sort of precision strikes, the downfall is that we become so accustomed that every strike will be exactly precise. And unfortunately, that's not always a reality. I do want to make sure I share, let's say at least two stories of individuals I had the opportunity to lay to rest at Arlington, just because I think their stories are significant and meaningful. Now we mentioned Senator Lautenberg. You can think what you want of him as a senator. I just thought it was a neat opportunity. But in 2018, I had the opportunity to officiate at the funeral of an individual by the name of Major Gideon Lichtman. So who was Major Lichtman? He was a fighter pilot for the Army Air Corps in World War II. But what was particularly interesting is after World War II ended, he was among the American pilots that went over to Israel and was part of the Machal of the foundation of the Israeli Air Force, and fought in Israel's War of Independence. He was credited with the first air-to-air shooting down of an Egyptian aircraft during Israel's War of Independence. And his roommate during that war was none other than Ezer Weizmann, who then went on to be the 7th president of the State of Israel. So fast forward, right, Israel wins the war. Major Lichtman comes back to the United States. He remains in the Air Force Reserves as a pilot and test pilot, but he's teaching math full-time as a math teacher in Florida, in the public school system in Florida. And one day, I think this was in the 60s, he gets a call from his old roommate, Ezer Weizmann, who was telling him or letting him know that Israeli intelligence has discovered that Egypt is looking to try to assassinate all of the foreigners that fought on behalf of the State of Israel. So you should really think about changing your name. So Gideon Lichtman, for a period of time, changed his last name to Ramon. Now, what does Ramon mean in Hebrew? We might think of it, many of us think of Ramon as the Hebrew word for pomegranate, but Ramon in a military context means grenade, because Gideon Lichtman supposedly had an explosive personality. So he goes by Ramon for a number of years. Thank God, right, Israel makes peace with Egypt. His name reverts back to Lichtman. Now, fast forward again, it's 2018. He passes away, and my congregation at Agudas Achim, I think similar to Rodef at the time, had a shlicha from Israel working in the congregation. And she was going to be in Israel that summer, about a month before this funeral was to take place, visiting family. And we had arranged for some earth from Har Herzl to be brought back to the United States and placed in the ground at Arlington National Cemetery, because this individual was really a hero for both countries. And I'll never forget, officiating that funeral was not just members of the Air Force Honor Guard present, but members of Israel's defense attaché who were present at that funeral as well. And sort of this like blending of so many hats and worlds colliding all at the same time. That's one story. The second story I'll share, it was March 2nd, 2020. The band was in place, the honor guard had the rifles ready, and I began to officiate at the funeral of an individual by the name of Colonel Isaac Samuel Israel. Now, who is Colonel Israel? Colonel Israel joined the Army Air Forces as a navigator, similar to Larry over here. But he flew the C-47 transport plane, and he actually flew across the English Channel on D-Day, and he was later shot down in Holland. With flames coming from his engine, he was able to safely land the aircraft. Everyone survived the crash. Spent some time sort of navigating the woods in Holland. Fast forward to 1945, it's April 26, 1945, and Colonel Israel and his men approach the Dachau concentration camp. And on that day, the Germans forced more than 7,000 prisoners, mostly Jews, on a death march. During that march, many people died. The Germans shot anyone that couldn't walk anymore. And 3 days later, on April 29th, Colonel Israel, along with American forces, liberate Dachau. A few weeks later, in early May of 1945, the American forces liberated the prisoners who had been sent on that fateful death march. And one of those prisoners that was liberated was an individual by the name of Benjamin Weltman. And Benjamin Weltman was originally from Sosnowiec, Poland. He was 18 years old at the time of his liberation. He came to the United States, and in 1953, married an individual by the name of Gerda Biggs, who herself fled Vienna, Austria, shortly after Kristallnacht. The two of them got married, and 2 years later, in 1955, they gave birth to my mother. So on March 2nd of 2020, as I stood over this grave of Colonel Israel, I basically said to this family, right, because of your father, right, I'm alive, I'm here today. And so again, this colliding of worlds and stories, and you recognize the heroism and the selflessness of generations prior that enable us to live our lives in the way that we desire to live them. Yeah.
I have a question about.
We've got a question, and then I'll come to you, because we're going to go in the order in which.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. On a quick light note, if we have indeed 16 Jewish chaplains right now, we need 2 more for the obvious reasons. 18?
That's right.
Okay,
That's right.
Never mind. My serious question is this. I did some volunteer work around last Christmas for Wreaths Across America, which you're familiar with. I found something at least was very disturbing to me. It wasn't to some others, but it was to me, which was that many of the volunteers had been instructed or were told, as it was kind of handed down to them, to not put the wreaths on Jewish stones. Now, the wreaths don't say anything about Christmas or Christ, nothing religious about them, although I recognize that informally a wreath is kind of a Christian symbol. There were instances where I still thought every grave deserved a stone. So when I had a wreath, deserved a wreath. When I had a wreath in my hands, I would find a Jewish stone that didn't have one and put it on. Then a minute later, I would see somebody come along and remove it. which was, so there was two things that disturbed me. One, that many volunteers were not putting them on, and I was kind of picturing in my mind, I didn't see this, but there were many people there with their kids and their families, and I could picture a little kid perhaps putting a wreath on a stone and the father saying, "Oh, don't do that, Johnny, he's a Jew," or something like that. Maybe not meaning it too negatively, but you have to single out and observe and find the Jewish stars to know not to put a wreath there. And that was, to me, was unseemly. But even worse was volunteers sometimes removing a wreath, which may very well have been put on that Jewish gravestone by a relative. I mean, there's so many intermarriages in the world and the rest. So I just wanted you to comment on that and tell us a little more about the procedure and whether I'm overreacting.
This question comes up every year. On the one hand, right, there are individuals who have a similar sensibility of, well, gee, right, you're singling out the Jewish individuals. Sort of, hey, by the way, this is a Jewish person, so no wreath there. On the other hand, you have many, many individuals in this country that if they found out that they're Jewish, right, Bubby or Zadie, right, had a wreath at their gravestone, would plot, right, would be really upset. And it's also, it's impossible to say, okay, well, we're going to reach out to every family member of, right, I think there's about 5,500 Jewish individuals buried at Arlington. So we're going to reach out to the families of these 5,500 individuals, which in and of itself is impossible, because some of them, who knows who the family is anymore, and say, well, do you want or not want? I think, by and large, that the sensibility of the feeling is that while, yes, there's no cross or anything else on the wreath, a wreath is associated with the Christmas holiday, which is a Christian holiday. And I think wreaths, for the most part, in this country have a very Christian connotation to them. Although, every time someone has said, well, Jews don't put wreaths on graves, again, if you go to Israel or Har Herzl, right, they have wreaths. Right, so clearly it's not true that wreaths aren't a Jewish thing. It's just not a Jewish thing in America. So I mean, it's I don't know. It's a lose-lose proposition, right? It's like damn if you do, damn if you don't. So yeah, and every single year, there are well-meaning individuals that try to put the wreath everywhere, and then someone else says and files a lawsuit and sends us to Congress and why this violation of church and state, and you're putting a Christian symbol on my Jewish father's grave, and it's okay. Take the wreaths away, and then how come you're singling me out? And it's like back and forth.
I put a wreath on the same grave probably 7 times, and 6 times it was removed. The 7th time, I just simply waited until everybody was gone, the trucks were gone, and I had that last wreath in my hand, and I went and put it on, so there was nobody to take it away.
Maybe we should get a bunch of Jewish volunteers on, like right before, around the high holidays, we'll have like stones across America. We'll put like little stones on every grave. They don't wither, they don't go bad.
Everybody gets a stone.
Or everyone gets a stone.
Everyone gets a stone. Last question.
Last question. I have a question about insubordination. My husband was in the Pentagon, and he was a physician and a many-star general came in and said, I want you to put something on my foot that would, heal it. It was athlete's feet. And my husband said, the medication that you want is potentially lethal. I'm a physician and I'm caring for my patient. Well, his commanding officer ordered my husband to do what the general wanted. And my husband said, no. And the next day, he got orders to Vietnam. He said, afterwards, I would have given him whatever he wanted. But he was treating him as a patient, not as a general.
Just because you outrank someone doesn't mean you could tell them to do whatever you want them to do, right? Not every order is a lawful order. And look, if one wanted, right, you said, all right, I'm gonna take this to the JAG and to legal, and we'll see whether this is a lawful order or not. But
The next day, he got
Right.
orders, and off he went
From which he returned, thanks.
To Okinawa.
to Okinawa. Yeah.
although when my wife's grandfather was in Guam during World War II, and they were finally getting a chance to come back home, and the transport plane is heading home, and my wife's grandfather was ready to get on the plane, got the last seat in the plane, until the commanding officer says, "Out of this seat, I'm going home, off this plane." And he was a sergeant, so he got off the plane, and the commanding officer got on the plane. Tragically, the plane crashed. So sometimes, what can I say?
I know Larry said it was the last question, but I have one last lighthearted one because I don't know when I'm going to be able to ask a Jewish military officer again. And you'll forgive me because I don't know if it's Air Force or Space Force. But can you, while you're here, kind of secretly, can you tell us what's really going on with the Jewish Space Laser Force?
Oh, the Jewish space lasers.
We were so close.
There is a lot of sort of funny, just sort of like just I guess Jewish gallows humor on that. It's like, I was sharing with Larry before, but the gallows humor that was flying around Israel on Saturday nights, and maybe some of you saw some of this, but my favorite was first nonstop flight from Iran to Israel since 1979. So sometimes when the situation gets rough, Jews get funny. I don't know.
I want to thank Rabbi Chaplan Major Rein and TRS esteemed member, Lieutenant Colonel, retired Larry Chalmer. And I also want to thank every member of our audience who has served in the military, served our country with distinguished honor. We salute you. We thank you for your service to our country. And I know I've said this before, I wonder going forward, when we don't have a generation of young people that we're raising who don't have that experience of having served their country, how they will ever come to understand the debt that they owe this country for the citizenship that they have been gifted with by virtue of being born here. And so, we know World War II was the greatest generation, but the greatest generation represents everybody who said yes when, as we called this series, answering our country's call, when our country called and you said yes. So thank you to you. Thank you to everybody who has said yes. Thank you to our speakers for adding an enlightening and deeply enriching coda to our series. And we've heard over the last couple of years, without getting political, I will say, that we've heard many times that Jews have divided loyalties. We can't be citizens of the United States because we already owe our allegiance to Israel, that we don't know where we belong or who our allegiance should be given to. And it was my great hope as we planned this series that all of us who participated, whether as speakers or as audience, could walk out of the room knowing that we can be really proud that having come here as strangers at some point in our family's history, which we all did, when our country needed us, we stood up. And we were proudly observant and grateful for the very many gifts that this country has given us and showed that in a very tangible way. And I hope that all of us will take, if with everything else we got through this series out of this room, the pride of knowing that we have a seat at the table and that we can be very proud of what we have done and what we'll continue to do to be faithful and loyal members of this country. So thank you very much. Beit Midrash 2025 is already in the planning works. We hope you'll join us. We hope you'll join us for all the other great adult ed programs that we have coming down the pike. Myra?
Ellen and I, we owe a great debt to the families of the servicemen who serve.
Yes, right. Yes, families too. As a proud Marine wife, I'm happy to accept on that behalf. So thank you, everybody. I hope you'll join us out in the hallway for what I hope will be an onig. I see some tables out there. I hope there's something on them. Rabbi Rein and Larry, you'll be around for a couple minutes to talk. Thank you all very much for joining us, and happy Passover to all of you.
Thank you.